Colby.
I'm Daniel.
And this is Colby and Daniel Reviews Movies. And today we want to talk about Terminator 2, the 1991 follow-up to the original Terminator. Now, this movie, I think it heightens a lot of the best parts of the original Terminator, but it also exacerbates some of the flaws. And I think ultimately it really lacks direction and is trying to be two different movies at once, particularly kind of this high-concept sci-fi horror kind of genre, as well as like an 80s kids movie, which is a very weird blend, and I think that really brings it down and kind of disables it from being the best film it could be.
Right.
Okay, so let's start with the highs. I think ultimately the best part is Arnold Schwarzenegger's performance. He's, again, iconic. He's really fun to see. And they made a great decision by having him be a good guy this time so that he's more prominently featured in the movie and you get to see him more, and he's just really cool in this movie again.
That's definitely the best part. With Arnold Schwarzenegger on like the good guy team, it means we get to see way more of him. So that's excellent. And he basically carries his film on his back. At one point, Arnold Schwarzenegger pulls out this enormous like helicopter minigun, and he's just shooting these police cars. But it's a real minigun from like a real helicopter, and he's just absolutely taking out these cars and terrifying the police. So that I think was a great example of how that's just way better than Terminator 1. Like, there's nothing like that in Terminator 1.
The premise of the film is pretty simple. It's basically set 13 years in the future. Sarah Connor now has a son, John Connor, who's a 13-year-old. And a new Terminator, a new model of Terminator is coming to kill him. And so John Connor's in the future, sends another Terminator to protect himself. And so now that Terminator is Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he's now the good guy. And there's a new, faster model who is the bad guy. And I think that setup is kind of where the issues begin. Because you have a couple different problems here. First one, you now center the film around John Connors instead of Sarah Connors again, which is really frustrating because the first film kind of just treated Sarah Connors as like a MacGuffin. She was just like an item that the plot kind of worked around. And now, again, she kind of works as like an auxiliary item to John Connors. And
it's a really strange choice. Like, the fact that they didn't make the 11-year-old kid be the MacGuffin?
Right. They decided to give the kid, like, a ton of agency, which then kind of makes it feel like, is this a kid's movie? There's a lot of, like, kids, like, jokes and humors and, like, kind of just, like, kind of this bratty, like, 80s child. And I really disliked all of that part of the film when it's, like, little kid, like, makes fun of Arnold Schwarzenegger is kind of the butt of the joke. And it's not that good. It also kind of then shoves Sarah Connors into this weird side role where, like, it also kind of just shoves Sarah Connors into this weird side role where she now has to be taking orders from, like, this 13-year-old kid. And I think the film also kind of confuses the idea of having, like, a lot of guns and action as having agency.
Right. Right. Like we were saying earlier, Sarah Connors has the aesthetic of like this like strong female character, but is very poorly written. She just is capable of using guns and like violence, but
she's extremely single-minded and can't really think of anything larger, and also is like, again, like extremely like emotional and like treated as just like this emotionally scarred like person.
Right. Her like PTSD is neither like taken seriously as like this woman is like suffering from like legitimate grievances completely, even though obviously like the film does acknowledge that those things happened, but doesn't like seriously go into like, oh wow, isn't this terrible that she has PTSD? And so it's neither that, so they don't treat that seriously, but then they also don't just be like, they don't just let her like bounce back. It just seems like they're like, it seems like they just treat her kind of like a wounded animal during a lot of the movie, and it's not the worst female character written. She's not a complete MacGuffin, but it's weird that she's like an auxiliary character for her son. It's just weird, and
it's particularly weird in this movie because the movie contains a lot of kind of like horror elements. Like there's scenes where Arnold Schwarzenegger has to like cut open his skin and like you can like it's just kind of gory and gruesome, and it feels weird that this is also like a kids movie, and there's like a lot of like violence as well. So it's like, is this designed for 13-year-olds or is this designed for like adults, or like who is the film exactly designed for? But besides not knowing what type of movie it wants to be, it also doesn't quite know what it wants to say. It feels like it wants to say something, but it's just not quite sure. So sometimes it feels like it wants to have a certain kind of like common morality when Sarah Connors is going to preemptively kill the guy who creates Skynet. Her son has to be kind of this voice of reason, like that. No, that you can't judge someone before their actions, that they're still have like a family and stuff like that. So it feels like maybe that's the moral, right? So it feels like potentially the moral is you can't prejudge someone on crimes, right? And it's kind of maybe this kind of like ancient like fable dealing with fate and whether or not we can do something about that. But then the film just doesn't want to engage with that because he ends up dying anyway, but in like kind of like an accident instead. And so it feels like they saved us from Skynet because they ended up killing the guy, but they didn't intend to kill him. And so that robs them of making an actual choice.
The parallel between Schwarzenegger becoming more human and Connors becoming more robotic could be an interesting parallel story.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's set on this like kids movie ends up derailing it again, because things like what you were saying, she doesn't actually get to go full robot and kill this guy.
Yeah.
So she's robbed. She's robbed of like an ending there.
Yeah.
And Schwarzenegger, like what we said earlier, Schwarzenegger doesn't get to become like fully emotional because he has to do a bunch of murdering.
Right.
For the plot to advance.
Right. Right. And I feel like some of this is just kind of in the prism of a blockbuster. Is like, well, we want to see Arnold Schwarzenegger shoot a bunch of people and be cool and be a big action star. And so I feel like that kind of really undercuts a lot of the ideas of like just, is he becoming human? Is he becoming compassionate? Because you also have this kind of weird interest in seeing him being violent, I guess.
Right. And so that's just fundamentally like you can't really have it. Schwarzenegger learns to be compassionate and then like also have the finale be Schwarzenegger commits awesome violence and it's really cool. In the end of the film, they destroy the chip that is used to do research that Skynet eventually comes from. And that's cool. And then apparently the like nuclear apocalypse and stuff is averted or whatever. But I guess it just leaves this weird question of, are they trying to say, right, that fate can be altered and that like this march of machines isn't inevitable and that humans can stop it before it even happens? Or are they trying to say that technology inevitably marches on and is superior to humans?
Mm-hmm.
And it just feels like sometimes they're saying one thing and sometimes they're saying the other thing. And
I agree.
Can't pick.
Yeah. Those are the major themes of the movie that I came away with. I think a few minor things is that like the CGI, I think at the time was probably really exciting. Now it looks extremely dated. I think it's a little harsh to judge it on that because I know that
that's 30 years ago.
Right. And James Cameron, like, he wants to push CGI at the time. So I understand that kind of limitation. I think that the villain in this film, is just not an equal to Arnold Schwarzenegger, so he just kind of feels a lot weaker when they're in the scenes together. I think that they could have maybe cast like a maybe more exciting actor or something. It's tough to create someone with the same physicality as Arnold Schwarzenegger, but I just thought he was a bit boring.
Right. There's also just some like we're trying to tone down the violence apparently, but there's some scenes like at one point there's like a nuclear explosion and Sarah Connors is like pulling on this chain link fence and then her skin gets blown off and then it's like a skeleton holding on a chain. It just goes on.
Yeah, and her voiceover stuff. There's a scene where this prison guard is in Sarah Connor's room at night and just kind of like licks her face or something like that, and it's really creepy and gross, and it's just completely unneeded.
They've already shown that the prison guards are evil.
Yeah, so that kind of choice to leave that in the movie is just a bad call.
Yeah. What's sad and frustrating to me is that there's a really good movie that could have been made in this movie. And all you would have to do is pick a tone, pick a genre, pick a theme and have Sarah Connors and Arnold Schwarzenegger be the foils off of each other instead of John Connor.
Yeah.
And if you had done all those things, I think this movie would be amazing. And what it is not. It's not that. And I guess to me, I can't help but see this with a bit of a twinge of frustration because it could have been this amazing, great movie. And to me, it just feels like kind of a middling movie.
Right.
Which is very uneven. Once again, in this movie, I think probably the best 20 minutes are at the end. It's an exciting fight scene. But then they just do the same thing they did in the first movie.
It's literally the exact same. They have this huge truck, and this time, like, it's filled with liquid nitrogen instead of oil.
So it's cold instead of hot.
Yeah.
And then they go into a big factory, so it's like kind of machines again.
Yeah.
But then the factory is now
it's like
a lava. The factory
it's like
is
a metalworks or something.
Yeah, the factory is like an ironworks, so now it's like a lava factory.
Yeah,
and
exactly. It's
just
like the same thing. It's definitely the best part of the film, the last 20 minutes, but it is the exact same as the first one. Although personally, I kind of missed that like cheesy stop action of the first one, and I felt like the reveal at the end was quite cool in the first one. But yeah,
it can't surprise you anymore. You're not surprised when they blew him up with the big truck. You're like, of course he's gonna come back, and you know that he's gonna come back like 2 or 3 more times because that's what they did in the last movie. And
Anyway, thanks for watching. We'd love to hear what you think of the film and if there's any films you'd like us to review next.
Thank you.